Greetings to all seekers of the truly beautiful. Proverbs 11:22 says, like a gold ring in a pig's snout is a beautiful woman without discretion. Our world has done a number on us. All of us, both men and women, have been stripped of our core beauty in order to make the most deranged among us feel normal. In fact, even the word normal is slowly being stripped from the language in order to deaden our minds with nonsensical newspeak. War is peace, ignorance is knowledge, and so forth and so on. There's a reason that our Ministry of War is called the Department of Defense. It plays differently on the mind. It cloaks a truth within a half-truth. We seem to know that there is a problem, but we have no idea how to remedy it. For the moment, anyone who tries to speak out against it are called to heel by censorship and ad hominem attacks, and even sometimes when the person hasn't been taught to think at all, with just demon-possessed screaming at the top of their lungs until the person gives up and even trying to talk reasonably with them. Beats all I've ever seen. We live in a time of the most militaristic forms of feminism the world has ever seen. They even have the hashtag men are trash. And yet we also live in a time when women are objectified unlike they have ever been in history. Every show that comes on the streaming services seems to make sure that at least one scene has a brass pole in it. The only romantic stories we are told anymore are tinged with homoeroticism, while women are used for pleasure and one-night stands. And if they aren't swinging from a brass pole, they're dressed in a bustier and leather pants, slapping men around like rag dolls. Even shows about how evil has taken over our society depict the evil as good and the church as evil. I was watching a show that gives the most graphic depiction of Crowleyanism that I've ever seen, and at first I was impressed. I thought, wow, anyone with any sense at all will see this as evil. I can't believe this station is actually presenting the truth. And then it began to slowly, methodically demonize the church through fictitious lies and glorifying the freedom that this devilish cult had. I was blown away. No way was I witnessing the complete and unhidden inversion of good and evil. They used to have to paint it up and put lipstick on that pig, but now they just bring the pig out and tell us all how beautiful it is. Pornography has become culture, and culture has become the enemy. I thought about listing the ways in which pornography was used by the enemy to completely flip social norms, but I really don't feel comfortable with the language I would have to use to explain it. I will assume, for the most part, that you know. Sexual acts that were once taboo were first engaged with and normalized in pornography between the opposite sexes. And once that became normal, then it became increasingly difficult for people to explain why it was unacceptable between the same sex. Think of it the same way that the marriage definition was first dissolved and then reimagined. It was dissolved first by discrediting the idea of marriage in the first place. We literally doomed ourselves by buying into the world's ideas of love and attraction, and in turn finding that we had been lied to. All of which resulted in divorce rates unlike anyone had seen since the last days of the Roman Empire, before the fall of the Roman Empire. When those who wish to redefine marriage asked us to truly defend our ideas of a lifelong commitment, most of us could only throw up our hands in despair, knowing that if we had to define it by example, then we were up the creek without a paddle. We had failed to defend the most precious things in life, and we failed to defend them for our own selfish reasons. And that is why selfishness is today's virtue, while chastity and self-control are today's vices. We did that. What must be done now is to strengthen what remains and pray that God turns back the tide. Then we got to a point where even the scriptures themselves became controversial. People in the 40s and 50s wouldn't have been able to even imagine this. Listen to the verse from 1 Timothy, and I bet even the saints nowadays flinch a little bit. Likewise, also, that women should adorn themselves in respectable apparel, with modesty and self-control, not with braided hair and gold or pearls or costly attire. Or how about this one from 1 Peter 3:5? For this is how the holy women who hoped in God used to adorn themselves, by submitting to their own husbands. That goes over like a lead balloon today, doesn't it? And yet, for all our freedoms, we have sacrificed something better. Were there men that needed to be knocked down a notch? Sure there were. Were there women who were being held back and being diminished by a patriarchal hierarchy? No question about it. We failed in many ways to address the changes that technology brought to our society and our culture, and to the newfound freedoms that it bought for certain genders. These things needed to be corrected in a just society. Who could doubt it? But we threw the baby out with the bathwater. So many of the things that made life worth living, so many things that gave life a spice, so many things that defined who and what we were at our best got thrown out with the same stuff that defined who we were at our worst. I forget who it was, but a famous feminist in our lifetimes fell in love with a man from a Muslim country. She had been one of the most vocal and militaristic of her generation. I wish I could find the article in the book. I'll have to find it on the shelf here, but I just don't have the time to hunt it down today. I will find it for anyone wishing to view it. One of her female admirers hunted her down years later to find out why she hadn't heard anything from her for so long. She found her living with her husband and their children happily in that country. She had even adopted the attire of the native women, which means she was covered head to foot. The admirer was appalled. How could her hero have sunken so low, in her opinion? So she asked, "What happened to you?" The old feminist replied, "I found love and happiness." I'm not getting all of this verbatim, but I am capturing the essence of the story. She said that she was treated with more respect than she thought possible. Not only was she treated with respect, she was adored and worshipped in a way that American men are incapable of adoring women in our lifetime. She said she had been a part of the sexual revolution in America, and that they had been wrong. Did wrong. Sex was not better, but worse for all their liberation. She said that when she entered the sanctuary of her bedroom and took off her head covering, that it was the first and only female hair that her husband had ever seen. Can you imagine the intensity as things became more and more romantic? I'm not saying we should go back to head coverings. I'm not. But I think we could definitely learn something from this story. Compare that to a nation that advertises ED medicine at every commercial break. Compare that to the little boys that on average are exposed to hardcore pornography at the tender age of 11 and a half. Compare that to the gender dysphoria and parents that are called heroes for tampering with their 8-year-old's hormones before the child's mind can even calculate long-term consequences. Compare that to doctors making a fortune by mutilating the body for mental conditions. Compare that to the satanic teachings of Thelema and Hollywood that confuses the act of sex with the choice of love. Compare that to young girls feeling like they have to perform like prostitutes just to catch a romantic interest. Can you believe that there was ever a time that the flash of a female's ankle was enough to raise the temperature of any man in the room? Feminism has done a lot of good that no one could possibly deny, but it is beginning to do a lot of harm. Where men were once in error, it is time to realize that women have the danger of crossing that line as well. We shave, we primp, we mask and hide most everything that was once natural about us. We do this for two very disturbing reasons. One, to become androgynous. There's a plan behind that. But also to appear younger and younger and younger. Remember when women would swoon at the Marlboro Man, and men would howl at the moon at the fuller figures of Marilyn Monroe and others. And even those were not as big a stretch as the women of Monet or the men of the frontier. Am I saying that there's anything wrong with changing tastes? No. But I am saying that even though tastes change, they should not be accepted without some critique and cultural inspection. And that is exactly what this week's Screwtape Letters are about. It is not enough to know the mindset of just our time. To have a full picture of both God and the devil's workings clearly throughout history, you must understand the mindset of those who came before and make some assumptions about what is coming down the pike. We can self-righteously say that what we believe is the enlightened way of thinking, but to miss the patterns of history is to be in a position of ignorance which the enemy will use against us. Just like many college professors of convincing the unthinking student that they are only intelligent if they agree with them. This is why it is said, "Wake up, O sleeper, rise from the dead, and Christ will shine on you." This week's Screwtape Letters, and remember, when they say our Father, they mean our enemy, and when they say their enemy, they mean our Father. Screwtape Letters, chapter 20. My dear Wormwood, I note with great displeasure that the enemy has, for the time being, put a forcible end to your direct attack on the patient's chastity. You ought to have known that he always does in the end, and you ought to have stopped before you reached that stage. For as things are, your man has now discovered the dangerous truth that these attacks don't last forever. Consequently, you cannot use again what is, after all, our best weapon, the belief of ignorant humans that there is no hope of getting rid of us except by yielding. I suppose you've tried persuading him that chastity is unhealthy? I haven't yet got a report from you on young women in the neighborhood. I should like it at once, for if we can't use his sexuality to make him unchaste, we must try to use it for promotion of a desirable marriage. In the meantime, I would like to give you some hint about the type of woman, the physical type, which he should be encouraged to fall in love with, if falling in love is the best we can do. In a rough and ready way, of course, this question is decided for us by spirits far deeper down in the lower archy than you and I. It is the business of these great masters to produce in every age a general misdirection of what may be called sexual taste. This they do by working through the small circle of popular artists, dressmakers, actresses, and advertisers who determine the fashionable type. The aim is to guide each sex away from those members of the other with whom spiritually helpful, happy, and fertile marriages are most likely. Thus we have now for many centuries triumphed over nature to the extent of making certain secondary characteristics of the male, such as the beard, disagreeable to nearly all the females. And there is more in that than you might suppose. As regards the male taste, we have varied a good deal. At one time, we have directed it to the statuesque and aristocratic type of beauty, mixing men's vanity with their desires and encouraging the race to breed chiefly from the most arrogant and prodigal women. At another, we have selected an exaggeratedly feminine type, faint and languishing, so that folly and cowardice and all the general falseness and littleness of mind which go with them shall be at a premium. At present, we are on the opposite tack. The age of jazz has succeeded the age of the waltz, and we now teach men to like women whose bodies are scarcely distinguishable from those of boys. Since this is a kind of beauty even more transitory than most, we thus aggravate the female's chronic horror of growing old, with many excellent results, and render her less willing and less able to bear children. And that is not all. We have engineered a great increase in the license which society allows to the representation of the apparent nude, not the real nude in art, and its exhibition on the stage or the bathing beach. It is all a fake, of course. The figures in the popular art are falsely drawn. The real women in bathing suits or tights are actually pinched in and propped up to make them appear firmer and more slender and more boyish than nature allows a full-grown woman to be. Yet, at the same time, the modern world is taught to believe that it is being frank and healthy and getting back to nature. As a result, we are more and more directing the desires of men to something which does not exist, making the real circle of the eye in sexuality more and more important, and at the same time making its demands more and more impossible. What follows you can easily forecast. That is the general strategy of the moment. But inside that framework, you will still find it possible to encourage your patient's desires in one of two directions. You will find, if you look carefully into any human's heart, that he is haunted by at least two imaginary women, a terrestrial and an infernal Venus, and that his desire differs qualitatively according to its object. There is one type for which his desires, such as to be naturally amenable to the enemy, readily mixed with charity, readily obedient to marriage, colored all through with that golden light of reverence and naturalness which we detest. There is another type which he desires brutally, and desires to desire brutally. A type best used to draw him away from marriage altogether, but which, even within marriage, he would tend to treat as a slave, an idol, or an accomplice. His love for the first might involve what the enemy calls evil, but only accidentally. The man would wish that she was not someone else's wife, and be sorry that he could not love her lawfully. But in the second type, the felt evil is what he wants. It is that tang in the flavor which he is after. In the face, it is the visible animality, a sulkiness, a craft, a cruelty which he likes. And in the body, something quite different from what he ordinarily calls beauty, something he may even in a sane hour describe as ugliness, but which by our art can be made to play on the raw nerve of his private obsession. The real use of the infernal Venus is no doubt as prostitute or mistress, but if your man is a Christian, and if he has been well trained in nonsense about irresistible and all-excusing love, he can often be induced to marry her, and that is very well worth bringing about. You will have failed as regards fornication and solitary vice, but there are other and more indirect methods of using a man's sexuality to his undoing. And, by the way, they are not only efficient, but delightful. The unhappiness produced is of a very lasting and exquisite kind. Your affectionate uncle, Screwtape. Don't let the devil sell you second-hand goods for the pearl of great price. He has traded you sex for love, but Christ has won love back for you. You can now love because you were first loved. Let's fight for a world where our children get the best of both worlds instead of the sad counterfeit that the devil and Hollywood has force-fed us since we were born. It won't be an easy fight, and it will take great sacrifice and inconvenience to withhold from them what they desire most, our time and our money. If the future is important enough, if it is worth it to you for your kids' sake, then it will be a small price to pay. There is no better time for the fight than now. COVID and the coof have decimated Hollywood, and the risks of Netflix and others have put a foul taste in a large portion of the public's mouths. Now more than ever, the times are on our side. Let us not fail to live up to the challenge. Let us not go back to sleep the moment we are fat and happy again. May the God that preserves go with you.